What started as a routine promotional interview turned into television's most explosive confrontation when Matt Damon walked off Stephen Colbert's show after being publicly humiliated about his past controversies, sparking outrage across social media. But from the moment Colbert emerged from behind his desk for the opening monologue, something felt different. His usual playful demeanor carried an edge that seasoned audience members hadn't seen before. The host's jokes landed harder, his political commentary more biting than usual. Staffers backstage exchanged glances, sensing their boss was in one of his more combative moods. When Damon was introduced and walked out to thunderous applause, the audience had no idea they were about to witness television history. The actor smiled broadly, waving to the crowd as he took his seat across from Colbert's desk. The opening pleasantries seemed standard enough. Discussions about Damon's new film, his recent family vacation, the typical Hollywood small talk that fills the first few minutes of any late-night interview. "So, Matt, great to have you back," Colbert began, his trademark grin spreading across his face. "It's been what, almost 2 years since you were last here?" "A lot has happened since then." There was something in the host's tone that made Damon shift slightly in his chair, though he maintained his professional composure. "Yeah, it's good to be back, Stephen. Always enjoy coming on the show," Damon replied, settling back into the guest chair. The audience applauded again, clearly happy to see the beloved actor. Colbert leaned forward slightly, his fingers steepled on his desk. "You know, I was thinking about our last conversation, and it got me wondering about something. You've had quite the journey over the past few years, haven't you? Some might say a bit of a bumpy ride." The host's smile never wavered, but his eyes had taken on a different quality, sharper, more calculating. Damon's publicity-trained instincts kicked in immediately. "Well, you know, it's been a learning experience like it is for everyone. I think that's what life is about. Growing, evolving, trying to be better." His answer was diplomatic, the kind of non-committal response celebrities give when they sense a potential trap. "Learning experience," Colbert repeated, nodding slowly. "That's one way to put it, though I think some people might use stronger language to describe your various, shall we call them educational moments?" The audience began to sense the shift in tone, a few nervous chuckles rippling through the studio. The camera caught Damon's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Years of media training had taught him to navigate hostile interviews, but something about Colbert's approach felt particularly calculated. "I'm not sure what you're getting at, Stephen," he said carefully. Colbert's grin widened. "Oh, come on, Matt. We're all friends here. I'm talking about your comments about diversity in Hollywood, your thoughts on the Me Too movement, that whole situation with your Cambridge neighbor. You've had quite the track record of stepping in it, haven't you?" The host's tone remained conversational, almost friendly, which somehow made his words cut deeper. The studio audience fell silent. This wasn't the playful ribbing they expected from a late-night talk show. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in closer, sensing the brewing tension. Damon's media handlers in the wings looked at each other with growing concern. "I think that's a pretty unfair characterization," Damon replied, his voice remaining steady but with a slight edge creeping in. "I've always tried to be honest about my experiences and my perspective, and yes, sometimes I've said things that could have been better articulated. But I've also tried to listen and learn from those conversations." Colbert chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Listen and learn. That's the celebrity handbook response, isn't it? But here's what I find interesting, Matt. You keep finding yourself in these situations where you need to listen and learn. At what point do we acknowledge that maybe the problem isn't just poor articulation?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Damon's hands, which had been resting casually on the armrests of his chair, now gripped them slightly. His publicist backstage was frantically whispering into her phone, trying to figure out if they could somehow cut this interview short. "I think that's a pretty loaded question, Stephen," Damon said, his famous charm beginning to crack around the edges. And frankly, I'm not sure what you're hoping to accomplish here. What I'm hoping to accomplish, Colbert said, leaning back in his chair with theatrical casualness, is maybe some actual honesty for once. You've built this image as Hollywood's everyman, the guy from Cambridge who stayed grounded despite the fame. But your actions over the years suggest something different, don't they? The studio had become so quiet that the hum of the cameras was audible. Audience members were no longer sure if they should laugh, clap, or simply watch in stunned silence. This had moved far beyond the typical celebrity roasting that was Colbert's bread and butter. Damon's face had flushed slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a warning. "I think you need to be very careful about what you're implying here, Stephen." Colbert's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise, his performance perfectly calibrated for maximum effect. "Careful? Oh, Matt, I'm just asking questions. Isn't that what journalists do?" He gestured to the audience with a theatrical flourish. "These good people deserve to know who they're applauding for, don't you think?" The calculated cruelty in Colbert's tone was unmistakable now. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing they were witnessing something that had crossed the line from entertainment into genuine hostility. The show's producers were frantically signaling from the wings, but Colbert seemed determined to ignore them. "You want to talk journalism?" Damon shot back, his composure finally beginning to crack. "Then let's talk about your responsibility. As a host, you invited me here under the pretense of discussing my work, and instead you're ambushing me with some kind of character assassination." "Character assassination?" Colbert laughed, but it sounded hollow in the tense studio. "I'm literally just repeating things you've said publicly. If that feels like character assassination, maybe the problem isn't with me." The host's smile had become predatory, like a shark sensing blood in the water. Damon leaned forward in his chair, his voice dropping to a more serious register. "You know what, Stephen? I've been doing this for 30 years. I've sat through hostile interviews, dealt with tabloid nonsense, weathered every kind of media storm you can imagine. But this?" He gestured between them. "This is just cruel for the sake of being cruel." "Cruel?" Colbert's voice rose slightly, and for the first time, genuine emotion seemed to break through his calculated performance. "You want to talk about cruel? Let's talk about the women who tried to speak up in Hollywood and were told to sit down and be quiet. Let's talk about the actors of color who were passed over for roles, while you and your buddies congratulated yourselves on your diversity initiatives." The studio fell into absolute silence. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut away. This had moved far beyond the boundaries of typical late-night television into something raw and personal. Damon's hands were now visibly shaking with anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You sit behind this desk and make jokes for a living, and you think that gives you the moral authority to lecture people who actually work in the industry you're mocking." "Work in the industry?" Colbert's voice dripped with disdain. "You mean the industry where you've repeatedly demonstrated that you don't understand your own privilege? Where you've consistently shown that when it comes to issues of real social importance, you'd rather protect your comfort than do what's right?" "That's enough," Damon said, his voice cutting through the studio like a blade. He started to stand, but Colbert wasn't finished. "Oh, we're just getting started, Matt. See, here's what I find fascinating about guys like you. You build these carefully crafted public personas, you hire teams of publicists to manage your image, and then when someone calls you on your actual behavior, you act like you're the victim." Damon was fully standing now, his face red with anger. "You want to know what's fascinating? A guy who built his career mocking politicians for their hypocrisy, and now you're sitting here demonstrating exactly the same behavior. You're using your platform to bully a guest, and you think because you wrap it in jokes and self-righteousness, that makes it acceptable." The accusation hit Colbert like a physical blow. For just a moment his carefully maintained composure slipped, and something ugly flashed across his face. "Bully? I'm holding you accountable." "No," Damon said firmly, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who had finally had enough. "You're grandstanding. You're using me as a prop in whatever personal vendetta you're working through, and you're doing it in front of a live audience because you know I can't really fight back without looking like the bad guy." The truth of that statement seemed to hang in the air between them. Colbert's smile had completely disappeared now, replaced by something harder and more desperate. "Maybe the reason you can't fight back is because deep down, you know I'm right." Or, "Maybe," Damon said, his voice deadly quiet, "the reason you're doing this is because deep down, you know you're exactly the kind of person you claim to be fighting against." The words hit Colbert like a slap across the face. His carefully constructed television persona crumbled in real time, replaced by something raw and wounded. The studio audience collectively held its breath, sensing they were witnessing something that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. "How dare you?" Colbert hissed, his voice barely controlled. "How dare you sit there and try to turn this around on me? I've spent my entire career speaking truth to power, holding people accountable for their actions and their words. Have you?" Damon challenged, taking a step closer to the desk. "Or have you spent your career hiding behind comedy so you can say whatever you want without consequences? At least when I screw up, I don't pretend it's in service of some higher cause." The brutal honesty of the statement seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Colbert's face had gone pale, his hands gripping the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles were white. "You don't know anything about what I've sacrificed for this show, for this platform." "Sacrificed?" Damon laughed bitterly. "You mean like sacrificing basic human decency? Like sacrificing the trust your guests place in you when they come on? Your show? Like sacrificing your integrity for ratings?" "Don't you dare talk to me about integrity," Colbert shot back, his voice rising to nearly a shout. "You're a Hollywood actor who's made millions playing pretend while real people deal with real consequences of the systems you've helped perpetuate. And you're a talk show host who's made millions pretending to care about those same people while you sit in your comfortable studio making jokes about their pain." Damon fired back, without missing a beat. "At least I don't pretend my job makes me morally superior to everyone else." The exchange had become so heated that security guards were moving closer to the stage area, though they seemed uncertain about whether to intervene. The show's director was frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue rolling. Colbert stood up behind his desk, his face flushed with anger. "You want to know what's really going on here, Matt? You can't handle being called out. You've spent so long being Hollywood's golden boy that you've forgotten what it feels like to face real criticism." "Real criticism?" Damon's voice was incredulous. "This isn't criticism, Stephen. This is a public execution disguised as an interview. You didn't bring me here to have a conversation. You brought me here to humiliate me for your audience's entertainment." "Maybe that's what you deserve," Colbert said, the words coming out before he could stop them. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and even Colbert seemed shocked by his own honesty. Damon stared at him for a long moment, something like disappointment replacing the anger in his eyes. "There it is. The truth finally comes out. This was never about accountability or social justice or any of the righteous causes you've been hiding behind. This was about you wanting to tear someone down because it makes you feel powerful." "That's not—" Colbert started, but Damon cut him off. "No, let me finish. Because this is important. You've built your entire brand on being the guy who stands up to bullies, who fights for the little guy, who calls out hypocrisy wherever he sees it. But right now, in this moment, you are the bully. You are the hypocrite. And everyone in this room can see it." The studio was so quiet that the sound of cameras could be heard whirring as they captured every moment of the confrontation. Several audience members had pulled out their phones, recording what they instinctively knew was a career-defining moment for both men. Colbert's mouth opened and closed several times, as if he was trying to find words that wouldn't come. For the first time since the interview began, He seemed genuinely at a loss. The righteous anger that had been driving him had evaporated, leaving behind something smaller and more pathetic. "You know what the really sad part is?" Damon continued, his voice now carrying a note of genuine sadness. "I used to respect you. I used to think you were one of the good ones, someone who used their platform responsibly, who understood the power they had and wielded it carefully. I am—" Colbert tried again, but his voice cracked. "No, you're not. You're just another entertainer who got drunk on your own self-importance. You convinced yourself that because people laugh at your jokes and applaud your monologues, that somehow makes you a moral authority. But authority without compassion isn't leadership. It's just tyranny with better ratings." The words seemed to physically stagger Colbert. He sat back down heavily in his chair, looking suddenly older and smaller than he had at the beginning of the show. The confident host who had started this confrontation had been replaced by someone who looked lost and confused. "I never meant for it to go this far," Colbert said quietly, though whether he was speaking to Damon, the audience, or himself wasn't clear. Damon looked at him for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was calm but final. "But you did mean it, Stephen. Maybe not consciously, but you walked into this interview with the intention of humiliating me. You had your talking points ready, your moral high ground staked out, and your audience primed for a show." The studio remained in stunned silence as Damon straightened his jacket and looked directly into the main camera. "To everyone watching at home, I want you to remember what you just witnessed. This is what happens when someone gets so convinced of their own righteousness that they forget basic human decency. This is what happens when entertainment becomes more important than integrity." He turned back to Colbert, who was still slumped in his chair, looking like a deflated balloon. "I came here tonight to talk about a movie I'm proud of, to connect with people who might enjoy it. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who decided that destroying me publicly would make for good television." "Matt, please?" Colbert started, but his voice was barely above a whisper. "No," Damon said firmly. "You had your chance to have a real conversation. You chose to make this into a spectacle instead. And now you get to live with the consequences of that choice." The actor began walking toward the edge of the stage, but then stopped and turned back one final time. "You know what's really tragic about this whole thing? You actually had the power to do something meaningful tonight. You could have asked tough questions while still treating me like a human being. You could have held me accountable without humiliating me. But you chose the easy path, the path that would get you the most attention, generate the most social media buzz, create the most viral moments." Colbert finally looked up, and there was something broken in his eyes. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "No, you didn't," Damon replied sadly. "You thought you were doing the entertaining thing, and that's the problem. You've been playing a character for so long that you've forgotten where the performance ends and the person begins." The audience watched in fascination as Damon walked to the edge of the stage. Some started to applaud, uncertain of the appropriate response, but he held up a hand to stop them. "Don't applaud this. There's nothing entertaining about what just happened here. This was a failure of basic human decency, and we should all be embarrassed that it happened." With that, he walked off the stage, leaving Colbert alone at his desk. The host sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at his hands while the cameras continued to roll. The audience didn't know whether to clap, boo, or simply file out in silence. Finally, one of the show's producers rushed onto the stage and whispered something urgently in Colbert's ear. The host nodded numbly and looked up at the main camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a commercial break," he said, his voice hollow and mechanical. "When we come back, we'll have music from our musical guest," but as the cameras cut away and the audience began to murmur among themselves, everyone knew that what they had just witnessed would overshadow anything else that happened on the show. Social media was already exploding with clips and commentary. Celebrity colleagues were choosing sides. industry insiders were debating whether Colbert had finally gone too far in his pursuit of viral moments. Backstage, Damon was already heading for the exit, declining interview requests from entertainment reporters who had somehow materialized in the hallway. His publicist was fielding calls from major news outlets, all wanting statements about what had become the most talked-about late-night television moment in years. The show continued after the commercial break, but Colbert seemed like a shadow of his former self. His jokes fell flat, his energy was forced, and the musical guest performed to a notably subdued audience. When the credits finally rolled, the host didn't do his usual post-show wave or banter with the crowd. He simply walked off stage, leaving behind a studio full of people who had witnessed something they would never forget. In the days that followed, the confrontation dominated entertainment news cycles. Ratings for Colbert's show plummeted as advertisers pulled their support, and A-list celebrities began declining booking requests. Industry veterans spoke out about the importance of treating guests with respect, regardless of their past controversies. Matt Damon, meanwhile, received an outpouring of support from colleagues who praised his dignity under fire and his willingness to call out unprofessional behavior. The incident became a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting entertainment value override basic human decency, and a reminder that even in the world of celebrity culture, there are lines that shouldn't be crossed. The confrontation that began as an interview ended as a reckoning, not just for the two men involved, but for an entire industry that had grown too comfortable with cruelty disguised as entertainment.